Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, A Taste of IFAI Expo 2022. I'm Jonathan Sweet, the Director of Content and Member Programs at the Advanced Textiles Association, and I'll be moderating today's session. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. During today's webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit any questions or comments you wish to any of our speakers, and you can do that by typing them in the questions box of the control panel that should be there on your screen. And you can send those questions at any time during the session today, and we'll address all your questions at the end of today's presentation. You can also find a PDF version of today's slides in the handout tab of your dashboard. And you can obviously, please feel free to download those and follow along or keep a copy at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and sent out in an email tomorrow coming from GoToWebinar. So the goal of today's webinar is to give you a taste of the education we offer at IFAI Expo. We hope that you'll like what you hear today and you'll join us at Expo for the full education experience. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the educational offerings at Expo this year, and then I'll hand it off to our speakers who are all not only speaking today, but also are three of our speakers at Expo this year. So joining me on today's webinar, Frank Kewen, Senior Technology Manager, Bolger & O'Hearn, Inc., Madeline McRae, owner and founder of Home Pro Toolbox, and Ben Mead, Managing Director at Hohenstein. So all three, like I said, are speaking at IFAI Expo this year, and they're going to give you a sample of their topics for the show. Go to the next slide. There we go. So I want to tell you a little bit about the educational offerings we have at Expo this year. Education is a key part of Expo, and we're really working to invest in that, improve it, continue to make it an important part of IFAI Expo. This year, there's many different ways you can learn at various price points even in Charlotte. So first, we have the Advanced Textiles Conference, which starts Tuesday, October 11th. And that's going to open with a luncheon and plenary session featuring Dr. Andrew Dent of Material Connection. And he'll be speaking about the future of performance and sustainability. We'll continue that day on, I said, October 11th with 12 more sessions across 3 tracks that afternoon, focusing on innovations and success stories from the advanced textiles market. Beyond that, our advanced textiles education will continue over the next 3 days as part of IFAI Expo. Wednesday, we kick off with our keynote speaker, Elliot Eisenberg, also known as the Bowtie Economist. That session is open to all attendees of Expo and exhibitors, so anyone registered for Expo can attend that to hear Elliot talk about where we are, where he sees things going, and kind of the outlook for 2023 and beyond. And then over Wednesday and Thursday, you can join in 20 different sessions across 4 tracks from technical topics to general business as part of our regular Expo Plus registration. You'll see you have a number of different types of topics: advanced textiles, specialty fabric, shade and weather protection. And these are panels, hands-on sessions, and really valuable knowledge for all of our attendees. And finally, open to everyone at Expo, you'll find our campfire sessions that are right on the show floor all 3 days of the show. These are shorter sessions that give you a chance to hear about innovative products, get industry updates, and see equipment in action. You can find a link to the full Expo and education schedule at ifaiexpo.com/schedule. That link is also at the bottom of the screen there. We can go to the next slide. These are just a few of the speakers we're going to have at this year's Expo. Again, that full list and session descriptions is on our website. But we've got Dr. Andrew Dent from Material Connections, a couple speakers from NASA, Mar Ricketts from Guildwork, Dr. Ronald Schneider from DITF, Dr. George Sun from Nextiles, a number of great panel discussions with some industry leaders, plus representatives from a lot of the leading companies in the industry, as well as several academic programs like NC State, University of California, Davis, Mississippi State, and more. We can go to the next slide. One thing we're very excited about this year is something we've added to the schedule for our deep dive workshops. These are pre-conference workshops that will occur on October 11th, the day before we kick off the full IFAI Expo. So these add-on opportunities, they give you a chance to spend more time with an industry expert in a smaller setting. We have 2 workshops this year, both tackling important issues to managers and leaders in any company. First one is with Madeline McRae, who Madeline is, of course, one of the speakers joining us today. And she's going to help you learn how to get the most of your employees by getting them to understand what needs to be done for the company to succeed. We know that it's always tough to get that message through and why things are done, what's good for the company, and that's going to be an important part of what Madeline talks about. And our second session, certainly another important topic with Tim Ledwine. He's going to help us learn about the differences between the generations and how we can help them succeed in the workplace. So very excited about both of those, and you can find registration as well as more information about these and all the educational opportunities on the website at IFAIexpo.com/schedule. We'll have the full schedule, and all the registration information is on the website as well. And with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it off to Frank.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking ATA for sponsoring this webinar and thank all the attendees who have logged on. My topic today is transitioning from fluorochemical-based to fluorine-free durable water repellents. Next, please. At Bulger & O'Hearn, we are manufacturers of textile prep and dyeing chemicals. We also manufacture and sell textile finishes, including durable water repellents, fire retardants, odor control treatments, as well as specialty coatings, particularly polyurethanes, binders, and adhesives. We are a Blue Sign system partner as well. Next. The outline for the presentation next month is going to center around PFAS. These are perfluoroalkyl substances. I'll talk about a lot about the concerns and regulations of these types of materials, how certain PFAS materials, fluorochemicals, are used in the textile industry, and the benefits that they give in terms of repellency and stain resistance to textiles. Talk some about the different types of test methods and standards for repellency, and focus on the fluorine, again, the replacement of the PFAS type materials with fluorine-free repellents. Discuss some of the characteristics, their material characteristics and properties between the 2 types of materials, and how these affect their repellency, and particularly how differently sometimes you have to change the processing to get the type of performance that you can only get with the fluorochemical based materials. We also will identify certain requirements of certain applications that are critical and can only be met presently using fluorochemicals, and how we may be able to employ these in a safer way and make the material safer from the chemical standpoint. And then a summary. Next, please. So again, the center of our talk, or this talk, will be on PFAS materials, what they are. US EPA defines them as per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They've been in the news a great deal lately and probably over the past few years due to toxic nature of some of these materials and their very long-lived properties. Sometimes they're called forever chemicals. PFAS, there are over 9,000 of these unique PFAS structures that have been identified by the EPA. They're commonly used in a variety of different applications, and have been used industrial for over 70 years. And we'll talk a lot about of those applications in the full presentation. Next, please. PFAS materials are, when they're polymeric, they're in 2 basic classes. There are the fluoropolymers like PTFE, where the perfluoro groups are in the backbone of the polymer, and then there are those that where the PFAS or perfluoroalkyl substances are on the side chains of things like acrylics and polyurethanes, and these are the types that are used in water repellents and oil repellents. We'll talk a lot about the structure property relationships of some of these materials, and again get into some of their applications, and some of these applications are critical, including aerospace, automotive, medical, and military. Next, please. PFAS materials occur in many different types of products, and these are just a few. Some very common ones are non-stick cookware, food packaging, plumbing, cosmetics, and the focus of this presentation for textile water repellents, water and oil repellents. They're also used for outdoor applications where their excellent weatherability is valued, like roof paint and the treatment of outdoor textiles like boat covers and awnings. They're also used extensively in fighting chemicals and in the finishes used on firefighters' garments. Next, please. So in textile water repellent treatments, PFAS have been used extensively for many, many years. This is because they give a very unique property profile of having excellent water stain and oil repellency. They're very good at keeping water from penetrating fabrics and also repelling oily liquids and oily stains. They also give other types of properties like hydrostatic resistance and anti-wicking. They can also be combined into soil release formulations where if the garment is soiled, they're easy to launder out the stains. And sometimes these are also combined with treatments that have both repellency and soil release. With those types of things, only the fluorochemicals are useful for that particular set of properties. Next, please. In the presentation, I'll be going over a number of the governmental regulations, what the status is for PFAS materials, long chain versus short chain, how it's treated on the federal level by the US EPA, state EPAs, and these can be very different, as well as foreign regulations. These will concern the worst of the PFAS actors like PFOA and PFOS, which are pictured to the left, as well as the types that are used mainly for fluorochemical repellents, where they're side chain types. And we'll talk about the length of the chains and so forth, and how that affects their properties. Next, please. We'll look at repellent chemistry in general, in the different types of repellents that can be used. As I mentioned, the fluorochemicals are very effective at coating fibers with a thin layer of very low energy fluoropolymer. So this allows them to repel both water and oils. Hydrocarbons, which have been around for a very long time, such as waxes, for instance, and other types of repellents, will be discussed. These are very good at giving water repellency in some stain resistance, as long as it's not a particularly oily stain, because they have next to no oil repellency. Silicones have been around for quite a number of years as well as water repellents. They coat the fiber with a thin layer of silicone rubber and give excellent water repellency, but the vast majority of them give absolutely no oil repellency. Next, please. We'll talk also about just the science of repelling liquids. What kind of a surface do you want to create using these different types of finishes? For water, you need to be creating a very high hydrophobic surface to keep water from penetrating in. And for oily liquids, you need to create a surface where the energy of the surface is lower than the cohesive forces that keep the oil drop together to prevent it from wicking into the surface and wetting it. And presently, the only materials that do this effectively are the fluorochemicals. Next, please. We'll look at some of the structure property relationships of these types of fluorochemical repellents, particularly the effects of chain length on the creation of low surface energy textile surfaces to prevent oil from in water from penetrating. Next, please. We'll talk about repellency test methods. These are the ones we currently do in the lab, and they go from semi-quantitative ones like spray testing, the A²TM22, to water impact, which is used a lot in medical textiles. Hydrostatic pressure testing, again, used a lot in medical textiles as well. And Bundesman testing, which is a rainstorm simulator, a much more aggressive type of more closer to real world testing of water repellents. Next, please. We'll also look at the different ways of incorporating fluorine-free repellents and how these differ in the way they're handled in the mill, basically. The effects of different types of fabrics, like polyesters, behave differently than cotton-based. Polyolefins behave differently because of their thermal properties or lack of thermal properties. And so we'll talk in depth about the different ways that we could affect good repellency from both fluorochemical and fluorine-free repellents, particularly water repellency. How to process these to get the maximum benefits. Next, please. Other properties that people don't often look at for repellents, where fluorochemicals, again, are much superior to current fluorochemical-free finishes. UV stability, we'll look at the effects of weathering on the repellent properties and how presently the UV stability is better for the fluorochemicals. Next, please. We'll also look at the critical uses for fluorine-based repellents. These include medical devices, medical PPE, medical apparel, different military goods, apparel, equipment, chemical manufacturing garments, and for people who handle chemicals, and also in the oil industry for handling and storage, and for emergency responders where fluorochemical-based products are used both for the firefighting, like in firefighting foams, and in the treatment of their turnout gear to give the performance that they need. Next, please. Another complicating factor for mill applications is that water repellents and oil repellents are frequently used in the same bath or in conjunction with other types of finishes. So these can include softeners and lubricants, anti-wrinkle, hand-building resins, antimicrobials, soil release additives, and flame retardants. Some of these pair very well with many non-fluoro repellents, but some don't. And so we'll discuss some of the ways to use these. Next, please. And because there are numerous critical applications of PFAS-containing repellents, we'll look at ways to potentially reduce the toxicity or the way that they're applied to reduce their environmental impact, and potentially ways to reduce the environmental impact through changing the actual repellents themselves. Please. So to summarize the presentation, in October, we'll focus on PFAS materials and the increasing concern to the public and consumers on these particular types of chemicals, which types of fluorochemicals are used in the textile industry, the benefits to repellency and stain resistance of using fluorochemical-based repellents, the repellency test methods and standards, and then the incorporation of fluorine-free repellents for water repellency in situations where you don't necessarily need the oil repellency of fluorochemicals. So we'll look at the material characteristics and application characteristics of both fluorine and fluorine-free repellents. Look at their properties and how they're processed and how they can be used in different ways. and then look at ways that fluorochemicals could potentially be used in safer ways for critical applications. Next, please. I want to thank you all for your attention. I just wanted to acknowledge some of my colleagues, Mohan Rowe and Jeff Ripka, who contributed experimentally to the presentation we'll be giving next month. Thanks again.
Well, great. Thanks, Frank. And we'll go ahead, and Madeline, if you want to go ahead and get yourself ready to go, we can move on to your presentation.
I'm ready to go.
Great.
Okay, so thank you guys so much for being here today. I am really excited to share with you a quick preview of what we're going to be diving in really deeply to at the Expo. So the way that I went about this preview is I'm just slicing a little bit of the content, a teaser bit of the content, and then I'm going to set you up for what you're going to be learning live. So just going to give you a little bit today, and then I'm going to show you how you can take it deeper by joining me in person at the Expo. So what we're going to be talking about is how do you stop playing the pricing game? This can be a really exhausting way to do business, where you have to back and forth with people and you're constantly having to defend your pricing position. Now, because of what's been going on in the news all around us, people are aware of inflation, people are aware of changing pricing, but when they're dealing with a small business, a mid-sized business, for whatever reason, that pricing awareness seems to just like shoop right over their shoulder, and they forget that maybe, just maybe, your pricing is going to be higher than what it's been in the past, and that pricing game can be really intense to play. So when we're talking about the pricing game today, what I'm talking about most specifically is looking at things from the perspective of either a B2B sale or a B2C sale. When you're really working particularly with the consumer, but even with B2B, there's still the same dynamics going on. So let's take a look at our next slide. So the very first thing that I think it's important to create a baseline for, and if you are in charge of salespeople, if you have people who report to you who sell, this is a really powerful question to bring to your sales conversations, but inside of your team, right, to bring to your sales training. And this is a question actually for everyone here live on the line. What is money? Go ahead and pop into the chat. If you have access to your chat, there's a little button you can just type right on in there. So if you pop into the chat, I will be able to see what you respond to. I really want you to think about, what is money? Because money is at the heart of our pricing questions and our pricing little wars we get into sometimes, and we need to really normalize on what is money. Now, the reason I like to start here, especially when I'm working with sales team members, and they're going to have to be having these conversations regularly, is that we all bring different baggage to this money conversation, right? Some of us were raised in a household, my household story, we heard a lot of times, hey, money doesn't grow on trees, and you have to work hard for your money, and money is scarce, was really the story that I grew up learning. I have other people in my life, many of my friends, who grew up with an abundance of money, and money was easy to come by, and there was no weirdness about it. I've grown up alongside people who think that if you have a lot of money, then you never make it to heaven. I have people who say if you have a lot of money, then you're absolutely making it to heaven. I have people say like heaven doesn't exist. So that's a lot going on, and there's a lot of big emotions that come up around money that play into some of this warring dynamic that you might get into with a consumer or with a B2B client. And when we run a baseline of what is money, so I'm not sure if it's me or if it's under a different chat here. I haven't seen too many of the chats in, but I'm just going to dive in as though you've told me. So what is money? I've gotten all sorts of answers to this question. I've asked this question thousands of times with so many training conversations. And what money truly is at this basic heart of it is simply a format to exchange value, right? Money got created when barter systems didn't work anymore because the product over here that one person had, the wool or whatever they had, didn't exchange well over here with what this person had. So money became an equalizer to exchange value. And when people have a negative reaction to your money, let's look at the next slide, What they're really telling you is that your value exchange is off, that the price you're asking does not match with the value that they see. And that exchange, that gap, when it's really wide, it's not overcomable. But a lot of us respond to the gap in the way of dropping our price, right? They say, whoa, that does not match. They say that's expensive, or that's too high, or that's too much. And what they're really pointing to is a value gap. They're saying that the price you're asking, the dollar amount, the money exchange that you're asking does not equal the value that we see you bring. And what can happen here is when we see that reaction, we can take it really personally. And it can feel like an attack, and it can feel very harsh, and it can feel really hard to get over. So let's take a look at the next slide. So when we are faced with that, we have to really think about what is within our power, right? As I mentioned, of course, you can always drop your price. But if you arbitrarily drop your price because of pressure from an external side, without changing any conditions, without shifting what you're offering, without adjusting anything, or without getting something in exchange for that price drop, what it reads to the outside is that you artificially inflated your price in the first place. Now, I've coached thousands of business owners, and I know that that's not how people are acting, right? You're just going back and seeing what you can cut and seeing if you can save here and seeing if you can save there, and then you're coming back with a reduction in the price to try and earn the business. But that's not how it reads. It reads that, oh, your price was high in the first place, and sometimes when you drop to try and equal out that gap for them, they want you to keep dropping lower. Right? Have you ever gotten in that scenario where you already gave a great price, or you came at it with your best price? They ask you for more, you give them more, and then they ask you for more again? It's because they don't look at things the way you look at things, right? Particularly when you're dealing with someone who isn't a business owner, they don't look at this the way that you're looking at it. So what else can you do? Let's take a peek at the next slide. One of the things that's really important to remember is that value is both a perceived and a real quantity. And one of the things that you personally, as the leader of the business, as the sales consultant, as the person delivering this pricing positioning to your client, you need to be the one who is absolutely rock solid, unshakable about the value you bring. Because remember that people choose to do business with people that they know, they like, and they trust. That's an old adage, and it is so true even today. People don't only do business with businesses. They do business with the people inside of those companies, the people inside of those businesses. And you, as a leader, as a sales consultant, as a sales manager, are part of that value paradigm. And it is really important that you understand what you are bringing, what unique value, not just the features of your product, not just the solutions for your product, but what do you bring to the table? Because when you can, go on to the next slide, when you can walk into the room and you have an unshakable, undeniable belief and understanding, a true quantifiable understanding of what you bring, you show up so differently. Right? If you walk into the room and your baseline value was here, and then when you walk in after this exercise, your baseline value is here. When your pricing comes in here, now your value is higher than your pricing. And that's when people say, ooh, what a great deal, right? The number hasn't changed. The number may still be the same high number it was before, but our positioning has. What we present about ourselves, how we present our offer, how we present our product, how we display our value. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've had value conversations with business owners, and they say that their highest value is quality. Well, congratulations, you've met the table stakes. If you have absolutely terrible quality, guess what's going to happen? Right? Your business is going to slowly, right? If you have absolute horrible service and your customer experience is just terrible, then you're not going to get repeat business. If you don't have quality and you don't have high service, which are a lot of the things that people say is their value proposition, then that you don't have the baseline value of the business. right? There are just table stakes. They're baseline values that you have to meet in order for people to take you seriously as a great company. And we have to display what's beyond that. If we say we have great quality, maybe we mean that we choose our materials really carefully. Maybe it means that we have technical experts on our team. Maybe it means that we have a specific way that we look at quality. Well, don't blanket that over with some generic statement that robs you of the value paradigm that you bring to the table. When you know what you as an individual bring to the table and you can quantify it for them, and when you can express the value that your company brings to the table in a way that is way beyond generic and that is way beyond the commoditization that so many other people play into, your value paradigm shifts, and that gap between the money and the value starts to equalize or even starts to play into your favor, where you're bringing more value and not demanding as premium a price compared to the value that you bring. So let's take a peek at the last slide. Whenever we are looking at pricing, one of the things that's really shocking that I learned many years ago during a big consumer study that I was participant in was that consumers make decisions for such a huge variety of reasons. And as business owners, as sales consultants, as sales managers, as the people doing the selling and dealing with that money exchange all the time, we focus a lot on the money because it's discussed and it's often pushed against. But in fact, only 20% of the overall buying decision is on the money alone. All the other factors play into it. And when we start to clear up those other factors, then we can play with the game, with the money game when we need to. And we don't get stuck playing the money game in situations where, had we solved those other issues around the money game, we wouldn't have been in this race to the bottom. So with that, my friends, I want to invite you to join me at the Expo. I'm very excited to be there live and in person to teach more about this, getting out of the money game, getting out of that race to the bottom, and learning how to position yourself really powerfully, both personally, professionally, and as a business. And then also, as Jonathan was mentioning, I want to join you for our management excellence. It's a deep dive. We're going to spend 2 hours talking together, and that is just such a powerful session that will really up your level on your management game as well. That will be really fun. Excited to see you in person. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Madeline. So our last speaker will be Ben Mead. So Ben, we are ready when you are.
All right, thanks everybody. Ben Mead with Hohenstein here in the U.S., but we're representatives of the German-based Textile Testing Institute, and so today we're going to talk a little bit about how we're contributing to this big demand for getting better data on how our products are produced and where they're produced. So if we can go to the next slide. What we see and the feedback that we get from our customers, whether they're brands or manufacturers that we're working with here, is that there is, sustainability continues to be a very important, pressing topic that people want to get around, and we've seen a little bit of a shift in, what's the priority as they deal with it. Frank talked a little bit about chemistry. That's certainly been on the radar for a while, and we hear a lot now about climate change and global warming, water impact use. And so one of the big drivers is this knowledge that we're not really on track to limit global warming to this 1.5 degrees Celsius goal that we want. And so you can see on the slide, obviously, that we have a target and we have our current pace, and we also sort of expect that in the future we'll probably produce more. And so that makes it even more challenging to reach that target. And so there's a lot of work going on, a lot of innovation from materials and manufacturing to try and reduce those impacts. But the value in reducing it is sort of reduced if we can't measure it, if we don't know what that is or where we're starting today and how we're performing. And certainly that's information that we expect and hear that everybody's customers want to have. So if we move to the next slide. not only energy use, but also water use. And certainly this is going to be dependent as well on, how stressed is the region where those textiles are being produced or where those products are being produced. And certainly if you're producing in a very water stressed area like the U.S. Southwest or parts of other production areas globally, that makes it even more costly to produce those goods if water is being limited and you're not able to get access to it. So again, just like greenhouse gas emissions, we see this demand sort of increasing as we move forward, but at the same time, the interest in figuring out how do we measure and improve that performance is increasing as well. So we can go to the next slide. So it's not all gloom and doom. There are tools, there are solutions out there available that people are already using, and one of those tools is life cycle assessment, which is essentially a collection of methodologies used to assess what are these impacts in our business, in our products, and how do you communicate those. And so essentially a set of ways that we look at it consistently so that we enable ourselves to communicate openly, honestly about our products, and it's clear, hopefully, either to the B2B or B2C customer, if we say there's an improvement, how do we measure that, and what do we mean that by? And so certainly I think we see that a lot in materials. So as we try to make these reductions in impacts, one of the solutions that people lean on is material improvement. So if I have a more preferred version of a material that I can use. So for example, if I'm using a lot of polyester in my product, if I can move to a recycled polyester, do I know that material itself is going to reduce my impacts related to energy and therefore greenhouse gas emissions or water use and those sort of things? And if you are, where do you get that data? And so having data that's already industry available for materials is fairly common. Obviously, the challenge is that material and is the data representative of your supply chain? So knowing who your supply chain is, where those materials come from, is very critical in, is the data that I want to use really representative and accurate of my supply chain? And so that's sort of a way that people are utilizing life cycle assessments currently. And the challenge is if that data that's available is not really representative of your material, where do you get that? How do you go through a life cycle assessment? Do you have the technical capability inside your organization to collect that data from your actual supply chain? I mean, the same thing is true not just of materials, but of processes, which might be something that's a little bit easier to control. So if we can go to the next slide. Then we see, essentially a picture of where do these carbon emissions in a textile or apparel product supply chain come from. And so we see a big portion of it in raw material production, in yarn production, but also a huge percentage of those production or of those impacts are coming from production facilities that are further up the value chain. So from our dyeing and finishing, from our final assembly, from fabric and yarn production as well. So we see lots of opportunities in areas where Hohenstein and the Okotex Association that we participate with have a lot of expertise and are already working. And so now we see customers sort of asking us to help them evaluate what's happening in their supply chain so that they can compare that or pair that with the data that they maybe already have for raw materials. So on the next slide, we sort of introduce in this session a tool that already exists and has been around and as a way to evaluate how sustainable is your production stage. And so STEP is an already existing certification from Okotex looking at each of these 6 modules. And so what we've done is sort of customize that now to add in availability to start to measure some of these impacts. So if we switch to the next slide. What we have the capability to do now is to start to measure impacts in an existing facility. So this is a tool within a tool. So the impact calculator is a tool within the STEP certification that helps facilities to understand where are their impacts coming from to measure those impacts, and then both on carbon footprinting and also on water footprinting. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll see essentially we utilize that data to gather a footprint both on carbon and water at a facility level, at a process stage. So if we start to think about how do these facilities work together to produce a finished product, we can start to gather, okay, what's the impact at our yarn spinning stage? What's the impact at our fabric production stage? What's our impact at the final product assembly stage? Gather those together and utilize, an understanding of, okay, how much product from each of those stages goes into the raw material, and start to build a pretty good picture of what the impacts are for the full product, without having to be a life cycle assessment expert, because the methodology and the sort of justification for why this is a sound approach to measure those and to quantify those is already built in to the tools that are existing. So it makes it, I think, something that's a little bit more approachable for a company that doesn't feel like, okay, they're ready to invest in a full-time headcount, or to it's really just sort of starting and looking at, okay, what's our baseline today? Where are we? Where are our opportunities for improvement? And so it really makes, again, that LCA type assessment accessible at the facility level, at the product level, and even breaking it down to a material stage level within a facility. So I think for now, I think that's a good little bit of teaser. Hopefully everybody's excited and interested enough to come to our session. We're excited to present a little bit more in depth on each of those topics at the conference in October. So thanks, everybody.
Great. Well, thanks, Ben. Did we have any questions come in for our panelists, Seneca?
We did have one or two questions come in. Frank, this one is for you. What category of textiles do you see the greatest transition from fluorochemical to fluorine-free repellents?
Thank you. I'd say the performance apparel markets are sort of in the vanguard of going to replacing fluorochemicals, probably closely followed by the carpeting industry in the U.S. They've seen a large increase for stain resistance, going from chemical to a non-fluorochemical. And also the Eurozone seems to be leading the way in this transition as well.
Thank you.
Well,
And to Ben, how does a company get started footprinting in their facility?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for right now, the biggest thing is starting to understand, okay, what are the different impact areas? And so that's something that I think that people can do on their own to really start to understand, okay, what are the different processes? Where are we getting energy from? So if we can collect our energy bills, we can collect the total amount of energy that a facility is using, and working with those providers, we can oftentimes figure out, okay, what's the grid makeup of where is that energy coming from? If companies want to start within the tool that we'll talk a little bit more about, then they just have to go to the Okotek's website and really just sort of start that application process, because the footprint tool is only embedded within the STEP certification at the moment. There's some talk from Okotek's that in the future that might be available for people either to really evaluate their supply chain, or even to just model different scenarios that they're thinking about as well. So options on both sides right now.
And Jonathan, that's what we had.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. And of course, thanks to our three speakers today. Hopefully you learned a little bit and we whetted your appetite for the education lineup at IFAI Expo, and you'll be able to come check out their full presentations in Charlotte. To find out more about these speakers and all of the others at Expo, we invite you to visit ifaiexpo.com/education. You'll find the full lineup, speaker bios, session descriptions, registration information, and all of that fun stuff. So we're going to be continuing to add webinars to our calendar throughout the year. So make sure you check out all of our upcoming webinars and events by visiting textiles.org/events. And finally, a very brief survey will appear when you exit the webinar, and we'd really appreciate if you took a few minutes to complete it. So once again, thanks to our speakers and thanks to all of you for attending, and have a great day.